but the police claimed we were squatting, and they tried to throw us out. Well, of course, they weren't successful because guess what? We weren't squatting. But the fact is that they tried to use that as a tactic, and it was appalling. And then, of course, we continued into Baltimore, and we have several churches that hosted us, which I got to say they were very gracious. In fact, in one case, it was kind of overwhelming for some of our members that there was actually a mayor of one of the cities that welcomed us, which never happens. Politicians generally don't welcome the homeless. Pretty much they want to sweep them and get them the hell out, you know.
Although I must say, Bruce, in my experience, I mean, I know there's two sides to this. Herman Melville once wrote a poem about there are two Americas, the America of the slaves and the slave owners, you know. But I have to say, in my experience, Americans are wonderful people. So I'm not surprised that you found somebody who would, even a mayor, who would be good to the march.
Yeah, and, I guess that was the more shocking thing with the politician, that a politician was that way. It wasn't as much shocking that we found some people that were very loving, caring, and hospitable. That was encouraging, as a matter of fact. But, as you said, there are people all over the country that care about this issue, but they're not always sure what they can do. And, throughout the trip, we had people bringing donations all the time, food, clothes, maybe donating $1 here or there. And some of them were giving, very much from their heart. They didn't have much more than any of us do,
Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, on the march, you had disabled people, elderly people. I'm getting in that category myself. Children. You had a diverse group.
Yes, we did. Multiracial, multi-generational, and other abled people. And it was very encouraging to see that, but discouraging at the same time. In other words,
all these people shouldn't be so poor, you mean?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And there is no typical homeless or poor person, but, we have these stereotypes in our heads that are so based on faulty logic.
Well, listen, we have a call, Bruce, so what do you say we take a call and then pass the phone around? So we have Wesley from Maryland, I think, on the line. Is Wesley there?
Yes. How are you today?
Hi, Wesley. Well, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon. What's on your mind?
Yes. Well, to me, it seems obvious to me. Now, I could be off on this, but we're talking about, unemployment is down. But what kind of jobs are people actually getting? They're getting jobs just in service industries. And, at McDonald's, and you can get 2 or 3 jobs, and the unemployment rate is not a good barometer because, I could work 3 jobs. They could all be part-time and all big McDonald's. And I guess people are kind of afraid. They don't want to really look at this situation because they're kind of afraid that, hey, I could become homeless. I could be this. I could be that. And it wouldn't take much. All you got to do is get old. All you have to do is get hurt on a job. Those things end up making you lose your house.
Well, you're absolutely right, Wesley. Let me thank you for the call, and we'll talk some more about this on the air. But thank you. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I'm very glad you made that point. Bruce, it is crazy. Bruce, you run into some people who are employed and still homeless, don't you?
Oh, yeah, quite a few. It's amazing to me. In fact, two of the people in our car lost their places in spite of having jobs, and also one of them also has disability. And you can't afford a place to stay on disability anymore. I'm not sure you ever really could afford it. You could barely buy, especially if it was a mobile home maybe. But, we have people that are employed and very hardworking people that they don't get enough to continue to stay in a place.
Yeah, we'll have Megan Hustings from the National Coalition for the Homeless on, and she'll know these statistics better than I do. Maybe it's a quarter of the homeless people are employed or part-time employed, and something like a third are children who can't work. And then there's a percentage which are elderly and disabled who can't work. So that means that if even anybody they know has a job, it's a job that has to pay for more than one person because they may be supporting kids or a relative who's disabled or something like that. So Wesley is exactly right. I think the National Coalition says there's no city in the United States of America where a minimum wage job will get you housing.
That's right. It's so true.
Well, let's see who. Please feel free, Bruce. Tell us who you're going to pass the phone to.
Well, I'm going to pass the phone to one of our people who's been just really, really a trooper in volunteering, having to be the designated driver for the van that we were blessed to be able to rent. And I'm going to turn it over to Andre now.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Andre. Welcome to the Homelessness Marathon. You want to tell people a little about your particular story?
Yes, and I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida, and I'm representing Florida with this march, and been homeless for a while here, but due to circumstances beyond my control, as far as being disabled and also able to work at the same time, and still not able to keep up with the rent or the lights and the water, the utilities that needs to be paid.
So what you're saying, if I understand it, is you have some disability, but there are still some jobs you can do.
Yes.
And you can't make enough at those jobs to get enough money. What kind of work do you do?
I'm basically a certified tailor.
No, really?
Yes. I am also a driver of OTR.
Mm-hmm.
However, due to the disability that I have, because I do have cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm restricted to certain jobs that I'm able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it goes off what you're able to do in order for them to help you so-called increase your income. However, there is a bunch of red tape that goes along to that, thanks to the government, that people have to jump through. And it's hard on people with disabilities for those to happen, even also with poor people who's trying to get in this situation where they can get some type of assistance from the government. So therefore, this movement is very important for us all, even the ones whose voices cannot be heard right now.
Let me give out that number, which is 866-LEFT-OUT, 866-533-8688 for anybody who might want to call in. Andre, walk us through this, because there's this, people out there, good people. They think surely there's help. Surely we're a compassionate country. So is there an office you can walk into where you say, look, I've got cancer. I'm limited in what I can do. I'm ready to work, but I can't make enough necessarily at the work that's available here. Can you help me with housing, and can you get help?
There's offices that you can go to, but also when it comes down for you to go to apply for those grants or whatever the case may be, you have to jump through a bunch of hoops. There's always going to be an obstacle that's going to be placed in your path. So therefore, you have to wait longer than an average individual, or go through more things than an average individual would have to in order to accomplish those things. Why? Because you have that status of homelessness up above your head.
How long is the waiting list for housing where you are?
You're looking at 4 to 5 years.
Let's repeat that, 4 to 5 years.
Let me correct that. It's 7 years.
It's what is that?
It's 7 years.
7 years. Okay. And people out there, you should understand, if you're listening to this, and this is all new to you, you should understand that not only is there a waiting list for supportive or subsidized or low-income housing all across the United States, in many, many communities, the waiting list is closed, meaning people are on that list are going to be waiting years, and now there's other people who can't even get on the list for the privilege of waiting for years. That's the real situation in the United States, no matter what anyone may think about it. That's what you've run into, isn't it, Andrew?
Yes, it has. And I want to reiterate, too, it's much even harder trying to get medical benefits as well to go along with that, so you can stay healthy and try to get things going along with you.
When you were younger and you were healthier, Andre, were you housed?
Yes, I was.
And were you making a living and supporting yourself for some period of time in your life?
Yes, I was.
So we should understand That you're not somebody who just woke up one morning and said, I want to freeload off the government and I don't want to work and I'm lazy and I think I'd rather play pool all day or worse. You're somebody who actually was and wishes to be a productive member of society.
Yes, that is correct. And also, people got to get out of that stereotype that, you got people that wants to just freeload off the government. There are people out there who really, really need the help, the assistance, and they cannot get it because of the stereotype that's being placed upon everyone, being a freeloader.
And do you feel I think what you've indicated is that when you do try to seek help, you're not really treated with respect?
No, you're not. You're being looked down upon.
And how does that manifest? They just are rude to you? What is it that makes you feel that?
I don't mean to cut you off. They do it in a nice, nasty way.
Well, take us to the meeting. Put myself. You're there. You're talking to them. What are they doing that makes you feel less in some way?
Well, me in my situation, I'm probably different from a lot of other individuals, but there's a lot of other individuals out here that don't have the access to get their birth certificates, their social security cards, or the proper identification that's needed to get the assistance. So when they tell them, you can go to this place, and then they go to that place, and they're giving them the runaround saying, no, we can't help you with this here because you have to have this here. You see where I'm coming from? That starts, if people are allowed to have the proper identification and have the assistance to get the proper identification, then they can move forward in the process. However, like I said before, there are obstacles that are being placed in people's paths.
Do they help you? Do they help you get the identification you need?
You have some agencies that does, but then you also have other agencies that just because of the person who you are, they're looking at you like, no, we can't help you, and they're turning their nose up at you and just like, we can't help. They actually can.
Where do you sleep? Where have you been sleeping at night?
Me? Well, from the latest, I have been with my little tent on the side in a field somewhere. Get up, going to places asking, can we use the restroom or take showers, which we are being denied of that. We cannot go down in Florida. We cannot even go to certain places without being harassed by the police.
And you're living in a tent right now. I mean, not this minute, but when you go back to Florida, you'll be in a tent in a field someplace.
Yes.
Wow. And that's not good. I mean, God bless you. I don't mean to criticize your living situation, but we'd all want you to be in a house. And where do you go to eat? Do you go to soup kitchens? How are you able to get food?
Yes, we go to various soup kitchens that are open, but now you have certain places that are turning away, saying that they cannot feed the community. They can only feed the certain individuals that are in their establishment. And that's wrong because you have other people out there that need the food, and they don't have no other means about going to get it because, you do have several organizations and churches out here that do show their gratitude and being helpful, like the churches that we came to on this march. They showed their gratitude, they showed their love, and I got to give them much appreciation for what they did because they didn't have to do what they did, but they showed the love that God has wanted them.
No, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that because no one should ever underestimate how much it means to people just to be treated well. Are you with other people in your tent? Are you alone in this field, or are there other people around you?
No, I have my fiance with me.
Oh, okay. Well, there's some romance there, huh?
That's it. She's been very supportive, and she's been like my backbone. She's been like, if I have to stay outside, she's not gonna go nowhere to try to seek shelter. She's gonna be right there by my side, sleeping out there in the inclement weather and all those things, just to be there with me, to be supportive of what's going on.
And people should understand that shelters separate people.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. So if you want to be together and be supportive to each other, which could be the difference between life and death, you have to stay out of the shelter. Andre, it's been fascinating talking to you. I could talk to you for the rest of the hour, but I know that there are other people there waiting to talk. Is there someone there to pass the phone to?
Yes, I am going to speak. I'm going to pass the phone over to my fiance, the young lady that I just spoke about.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, what's your name?
T.
T. Well, T, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Thank you.
And you are part, obviously, of the Florida contingent. And so you live right in that tent with Andre, then, right?
Yes. It gets pretty hot.
We don't. I'm a New Yorker. We don't upstate New Yorker. We don't have that problem so much, but it can get cold. That's a different problem. So you're out there in that field. I got to ask you this, T. Are you any place where you have to worry about alligators? That would make me out of my mind.
Actually, no, we're not, and we're in the midst of them, but we don't have to worry about them because. Right now it's about mating season, so yeah, we might have a problem, but we too high where we were. Actually, there's some people that own like kind of like a mechanic's yard,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a little bit of extra space. And we actually talked to them, and they were like, you know what? As long as you clean up after you're done and you know make it look decent, we ain't got no problems.
Oh,
So we were there for about a month, yeah, and wow. I have just recently lost a good friend. We have recently lost a good friend, and it was all because of homelessness and her not having any other choice but to be where she was. And unfortunately, she met a soul that was very wicked, and he murdered her.
Oh my God. And do you think if she had not, I mean, that does happen to people in houses too. Do you think that if she had not been homeless, that would not have happened to her?
If she had somewhere to go, that would have never happened.
Well, that's how I started this broadcast. I got a candle. You can't see it burning in front of me for all the homeless people who died.
There you go. It's all good. I feel it. It's awesome.
This is a real problem. For those who are just tuning in, you are listening to the Homelessness Marathon, the 20th Homelessness Marathon on the Pacifica Radio Network, coming to you from WPFW in Washington, D.C. So, T, are you somebody who is employed or employable or disabled?
I am employable, and I am also disabled. I'm missing a middle finger. I'm a diabetic, and I have hypertension. So there's a lot of medications that prevent me from like doing things like mobility. Sometimes I get fatigued and black out easily. I'm having a hard time keeping my insulin refrigerated. Thank God I have people that try to help, you know, to a certain extent that has been getting us by. But the biggest hindrance down there in St. Petersburg, Florida, is the cops. I am currently without ID, clothing, everything. And because of this march, I have been able to be blessed with some of those things back. And I'm so humble and thankful that I'm able to be here.
We're talking about the Poor People's March on Washington, sponsored by the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, which you're a part of. How did you lose your ID and all that stuff in the first place?
Basically, I had luggage, and we didn't have anywhere to put it, you know, and we go out and job search, and I kind of tried to hide the luggage because it was too heavy to carry. And our tent rolls down into a little pocket, so, you know, you can carry that around. That's not heavy. And come back, everything's gone. So I'm thinking another homeless person is taking it. No.
Okay, well, that's totally, we all can, in other words, if you had a place to lock the door, you'd still have your ID. So this is one of the ways in which being homeless, the situation just compounds itself and gets worse because you have no place to put your stuff.
And in St. Petersburg, the police are very good at hindering and harming instead of protecting and serving. I hate to say it that way, but it's very true.
Yeah, I understand. Well, first of all, we originated from Sarasota, so we've been down there and we know something about it's not good down there. And also, the place is overrun with homeless people because they're not dealing with it, and that creates friction. Let's take a call. We got a caller who might want to talk to you. That number of people to call in here, it's 866-LEFT out or 866-533-8688. We have Alan from Baltimore on the line. Alan, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Good morning or good afternoon. For the past almost 15, 20 years, I've worked with a group of fundraising for the shelters and the homeless and the shelters that provide them and serve them. And I found that to be very challenging to write political poetry that addresses the issue of homelessness. And I wrote a poem that started out, "Tell me that good times, better days are just ahead." Hold on. Hold on a second. They tell me that good times and better days are just around the corner, but somebody moved to the corner. And we did it's a play about the homeless. And I've done it several times, and I can leave my number. And if somebody wanted to get in touch with me about doing that.
Sure, Alan. Go ahead. Give out your number, and if anybody wants to call, and then we'll move along.
But I have one more thing, and I'll leave it after I get off the air. I've found lately something very disturbing. I was serving homeless at a soup kitchen, and I find it very depressing that I would have to actually go into the restrooms and pull people out who are using narcotics. I find it also kind of disrespectful to real homeless people when I see art students and people in good health, especially young white men, fronting off like they're homeless and at the same time wearing designer jeans and designer sneakers. And I know they're not homeless because I'll go into a bar later on and see the same people eating food that I can't afford. So I just wonder how,
let's take these things one at a time, Alan. First of all, you wanted to give out your number. Go ahead.
443-229-5325.
443-229-53.
239-5325. And
Okay.
I'd be willing to work with people doing performance poetry. But the other thing is, I get really disheartened when I see people who look to me and like
all right. Your connection isn't that great, Alan, so I'm going to move back and talk to T some more, and we'll discuss the points you've raised. Thank you.
Okay.
T, have you run into this where people are kind of
Yes.
fake
Yes,
homeless?
I have. Yes, I have. And unfortunately, because of that, the Salvation Army everywhere is always out to help the homeless and shelter the homeless. Well, the Salvation Army that we are at currently used to serve dinner to the community. Now they only serve lunch to the community, and you have to fend for yourself breakfast and dinner.
And do you think that's because they're getting overloaded with people who are not really homeless? What is the connection?
You have people that come up in there that are not homeless, that have money, that are preying on the homeless because why? They're trying to get a living for free because they're being lazy. They're taking advantage of the
system. Well, look, let's acknowledge first of all that there are people who use drugs who are homeless. That's not a myth. It doesn't typify everybody who's homeless, but it certainly exists. And there may be people who are, in some sense, taking services that really they're not technically entitled to. But on the other side, T, let's also say that you can't always judge a book by its cover. We're going to talk later to a woman who's running a safe parking program for homeless women and children. And some of the people in their cars are in Lincoln Continentals because they lost everything and all they got left is their car. You saw somebody in a Lincoln, you'd think they must be rich, but really, for some of these women, it's the last thing on earth that they own. So you can't always judge these things, even though there are undoubtedly some people who are phony. And on top of that, some people who are housed are just desperately hanging on by their fingernails, and they think if they can save a little money on food, thank God for that. I'm not saying there are no phonies. I'm just saying we should understand it's a broader picture than just that.
Right. Well, you know what? All in all, there's starting to be the organizations that help the homeless are about to be pushed in a corner to the point to where the city is going to step in and take away what they're trying to do if they don't do such and such and such. You used to be able to seek refuge up at the Salvation Army when it's hot. Now you can't come on the property, period, unless you have an absolute service like using their resource center or talking to the pastor because they got a pastor there that you can talk to. Other than that, not allowed on the property.
Now, in your observation, in the last few years, it's gotten more and more overloaded? Is that what you're seeing?
It's actually, yes, and it's getting worse
Mm-hmm.
in St. Pete. It really is. I mean, it's getting to the point where we ain't going to have nowhere to go. No one is going to help us. And we're just going to be up S Creek, basically.
And one of the issues in this field, one of the many, is that the HUD point-in-time count is considered very inaccurate. And so you're telling us from what you're just seeing on the ground in St. Petersburg, it's getting worse.
Yeah, and I do see a lot of HUD apartments that are vacant.
Mm.
And they're not doing anything to put people in there. And what about that? I said everything. It's just sad, and it's heartbreaking to know that these people ain't lifting a finger to do anything to try to at least help us. When I remember when I was a little girl, my mom paid $8 for rent every month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we still struggled, but we had a roof over our head. We couldn't complain.
Right.
I can count times because my mom was very sick all her life, and she tried to work, and when she absolutely couldn't, the government absolutely denied her for about 13 years disability.
Right.
So we had to struggle. My first job, I got working at a nursing home. I was 14 years old.
Mm.
I was paying rent then.
May I ask how old you are now?
37.
So you've been working now since you were 14 and you're 37.
Since I was 14 years old, yes, sir. And now I'm unable to work right now because I got a lot of limitations. Unfortunately, genetics is an MFer, ain't it?
And you raised an important point, though. I mean, people never would think about this, but if you're a diabetic, how do you keep your insulin refrigerated when you're homeless?
There you go. And that's what I run into all the time. But they did try to fix it with the EpiPen. But sometimes, that's all depending on what insurance you got. I got county insurance, so therefore I get stuck.
Right. Let me ask you one last question, T, and then I'll ask you to pass the phone because I know there are other people there. But what, for you and Andre, what is your prospect for getting out of homelessness and getting into a place?
Honestly, just finding a way for us to not be judged, because we can find jobs, but then very quickly they learn we're homeless and we lose.
I understand. Well, all right. If you would be kind enough, who are you going to pass the phone to?
I'm passing the phone to my good girl, Shay. Shay, here you go.
Great, Shay. Hi, Shay. Welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Thank you.
Shay, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your situation is?
Well, apparently I was a mentally disabled child that was pretty much floating out in the world all by myself. And then I didn't make right decisions, got sick, and struggled with the drug addiction, and met a man, and we got together for a long time, and he worked and didn't get paid, and now we're on the streets again. So I don't know. It's been a struggle.
So, okay, let me give out that number again, by the way. This year, you're listening to the Homelessness Marathon, and your number to call in here is 866-LEFT-OUT, which is 866-533-8688. So, Shay, you're saying if you hadn't been cheated out of whatever money your gentleman friend was owed, you might have actually been able to maintain housing.
Oh, no, we wouldn't be homeless right now, period. I mean, he worked for 3 months after the hurricane hit, and he just didn't get paid.
So let's just add this to all the list of reasons why people can become homeless, which is somebody cheats you and you have no resources to fall. It's not like, right, Shay, you didn't have like a Swiss bank account with $1 million in it. If somebody,
no, that's really nice if I did, but I didn't.
Yeah, so you don't get that money.
It's not even enough to pay the rent.
Right. So where are you living now, Shay?
Nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
You got some room in your basement you want to, trade out for some construction help from my husband? I mean, we're on the streets. We have nowhere to go.
So when you get back to St. Petersburg, you're in D.C. now, but in a few days you'll be in St. Petersburg again. You don't even know where you're going.
I have nowhere to go. I was thinking about maybe even staying in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I have nowhere to go.
Well, how, share with us, if you would, Shay. I mean, that's a terrible position to be in. How does that feel to know you have nowhere to go?
I'm really scared because, unfortunately, because of maybe it doesn't matter. Life is what it is, but, I'm sick and I'm worried, but, where am I going to sleep? How am I going to eat? How am I going to take care of the things that I need to take care of to be a better person, a better mother, and better health? It scares the crap out of me.
Do you have a child with you?
No, luckily, he does get to live with his father.
Mm-hmm.
But, of a recovering drug addict, homeless person is not really something that a child can be proud of. And it perpetuates a lot of the same poverty issues. And, I don't know, it's sad, and there's a lot of people on the street like that. If you do have kids, you got to hide them, though. You can't say you got kids on the street, so even if it did, I can't tell you that.
And explain to people why that is.
They will take your children. I was in a situation when I still had my son before bad stuff had started happening in my life, and I made bad choices as well, that I had called and asked for help. And with the disability check, they said that that's more than enough to take care of a family, but it was not even enough to pay the rent. And they said, well, we can help you, but we'll take the children. I don't see that as help, because that just adds to the children's anxiety. Now, they've been ripped from their parents or their security, and depression that hits a parent when you have lost your child is not easy to come out of.
You don't believe me. I know this is a terrible thing, and I'm so glad you mentioned this. Although I'm sorry that you're facing these issues, because there's a big scandal now in the United States about taking the children away from immigrants coming up from Latin America, Mexico, or whatever.
That's horrible.
Isn't it? But people don't understand that's going on every day with poor people here in the United States. This is nothing new.
Right.
They take children away because you're poor, not necessarily, which is poor equals in their minds very often that you're a bad parent, but you could be you could be trying your best and just be poor.
Yeah, sometimes neglect is not abusive, and people do not understand the difference. If you can't put food on your child's table, it's not the same as buying crack or refusing to put food on your child's table. Neglect is not abuse, but children are taken away for economic neglect that their parents cannot control every day.
It's true, every single day. And they're also separated in shelters and all of that, so the situation for children is not great if you're poor.
That was raised in foster care. And I'll tell you, he's definitely got an uphill battle for him.
Let me ask you something else, Shay. You have in your time met, I take it, many other homeless people.
Yes, oh yes.
Okay. Give our listeners a sense, all right? And again, this is just your personal experience. What percentage of the homeless people that you've met are really good people? What percentage of them are decent people who have issues, but they're struggling to make things better? What percentage are just no good? I mean, in any practical terms, even if they have souls that can be redeemed down the line, they're just into bad things right now. How would that stack up?
I really think that's an awesome question for you to ask. This is just from my personal watching of the environment around me, with no judgment calls, and I'm an addict myself, okay?
Mm-hmm.
My opinion, there are about over 90% super good-hearted homeless people. They will share with you everything they have. Maybe 40 of them are on some kind of addictive substance.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not necessarily narcotics, but something. Food, sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling. And that is not 50%. That's maybe 40%.
Mm-hmm.
There's about maybe the same amount that work. I mean, they're the workingest people I've ever seen. And they can't rent certain places because they'll let me bring it to the table. They got sex charges against them. They got felony charges against them. They work, can't get a place because of background check.
And that's a very important point. If you've got a felony conviction, even if you've quote unquote paid your debt to society, nobody will rent to you, and it's hard to get a job.
Both of these groups are veterans, and then I gotta tell you, there's probably about 20-25% that are just crazy as all get out. That's a disability. It's unheard of. To somebody that can't tell the difference between a street pole and their mama.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of sad cases of people who really need help. Yeah. Well, Shay, is there somebody else there that first of all, I thank you so much for your time on the phone, and I want to I wish you all the best. I think it's a terrible thing to be in the situation you're in, and I sure hope you get help and get housing. But that said, I don't want to neglect if there's another person there. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak.
All right. Hi, my name's Steve. I'm Shay's husband.
Okay. Hi, Steve. So I didn't know Shay was married. Well, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Yes, indeed. I've been homeless. Like, I have been working, and we have been housed for a very long time. And I've been working with I work with a contractor in St. Pete, and I've been working with him 8 years. And when the hurricane came through the Keys, he saw the opportunity, of course, to make a lot of money, and he took a crew of us. And it's a crew I've been working with. Most of the guys I've been working with in that crew have been several years, and we went down and we lived in very bad conditions. Down there camping mainly, that sort of thing. It was kind of one of those things where I'll feed you and take care of your daily needs, but we're going to come down, we're going to get this job done, we're going to come back, in 6 weeks, and then we're going to go back down. But you're not going to get paid until we're done with this job, which was not a problem for me. I've been working with him 8 years.
And this is the guy that didn't pay you, and this is why you...
Absolutely. And 6 weeks, and we got back, and he basically, what he did was he told the entire crew, look, I'll pay you guys, blah, 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 and he just went and hired another younger crew. Basically, he went and got some guys from Home Depot and a couple other phone calls, and he took another crew, and he fled to the Keys to go down there and finish work. So that was 6 weeks without a paycheck. And I tried to do other jobs when I got there, but I'm 55 years old, and I'm in the construction industry. And when you go to a construction site at 55 years of age and try to get on, that's not an easy task. And I wasn't really conscious of that because I've been working. I've been employed with this guy for 8 years. And so as far as not getting paid, that's a civil matter. So if you want to get paid, then I have the option to, get some money and sue him.
Right, get it. But the main point is that your resources are so limited that pretty much any remedy is beyond you at this point.
Right, absolutely. And the problem that I never even considered this was when you work somewhere for 8 years, and I don't care what you do for a living, when you work somewhere for 8 years, most of your friends and the people that you hang out with are people you're employed with. I mean, that's just, that's kind of how it is, with a lot of people.
That's your support system in many ways.
Yes, and all of a sudden, all the people that I might could camp on their couch or hang out with just to get over this, they're in the same situation as me. Everyone's scrambling, getting kicked out of their places, losing, their places. Everybody that I knew that I could go couch surf with was in my same situation.
Now, let's point out this is the same thing that happens when a factory closes down.
Absolutely.
All kinds of ways, but basically, whatever struggles you have in life, Stephen, everybody's got them. 1 minute you're employed and you're housed, and the next minute you're unemployed and you're unhoused. It's as simple as that.
It's that simple, and it can happen to anybody. It can happen so fast. And I tried to actually just go try to find some, just some quick handyman kind of jobs or whatever. And our landlord actually sent 6 members of an outlaw motorcycle gang to the house to intimidate us because he didn't want to go through the eviction process. And I was actually looking for work when, 6 outlaw motorcyclists come through the door to intimidate my wife, my handicapped wife, who's home alone, And the next day, my landlord came over with a drill and actually took the front door off of our apartment.
Wow.
I've never seen behavior
so
like
that's
this in my life.
in lieu of giving you your 90 days notice and all of that stuff, right?
Right.
Well, should we be thankful that there is a nice motorcycle gang somewhere where they're fully employed? I mean, there is a jobs market still if you can go and intimidate people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and so I went to a shelter after that, and I just wasn't aware of how all this works. You know, this is a life lesson. You know, because in shelters, first of all, like you had stated earlier, they separate you.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife is sick. She has lupus. She has rheumatoid arthritis. Like she stated, she's been getting a disability check pretty much her whole life, and now she's physically sick, and so going to shelters, being homeless on the street, that's an impossibility for us to stay on the street now. And in the shelters,
but Steve, everybody listening to this, everybody's going to be thinking, well, she's sick. You lost your work. You should be getting help, and yet it's hard to grasp. There's no help there. You can't just go somewhere.
There's no help there, man. There's no help there, and believe me, I am. I have neurons firing. You know what I mean? I know how to work this kind of situation, and I thought, I'll just go to these government offices and I'll talk to some people, and maybe I can get like a little help, maybe short term. This, maybe some. The bureaucracy is insane, and we're calling people about housing, and like they said, years. I'm talking about the wait for some of these services are years.
That's right, and they're still cutting them back.
Yeah, right. And when I went to one of the shelters that I went to, they're not set up for working people. The shelters are a situation where they expect you to be down and out homeless. And if you're working, they have all kinds of rules. And it's not that I'm a rule breaker, but they have curfews of time you got to be in by. You have a roll call. The roll call is at 8 o'clock. If you're on a bus system trying to get from, say, a job site where you're doing construction, trying to get, out in the morning and get back to there by 8 o'clock, it's almost impossible.
And this can interfere with doctor's appointments and things as well.
All of that, all of the things, the normal things that you do, and all of the normal things that the average American does, throughout their week. And you have these appointments that you have to keep there. They want you to come see a counselor, which is not a bad thing. It's just that if you're trying to work and get out of the hole and, if you're working construction for that's 12 to 14-hour days, and you miss a day, they got 5 other guys waiting for half the money that you're asking for. They're willing to do it. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult when you're in that situation. It's it's kind of one of those things where either you're down and out, totally broke, totally homeless with no job, or if you're trying to dig yourself out of the hole, you're really struggling.
Wow. Steve, let me ask you first, is Bruce still there?
Yes, he is.
So I'm going to ask you to pass the phone back to him, but before you do that, first of all, I want to say we wish you every kind of good thing. We hope you will get employed again, get money again, get housing again, and everybody will be, I'm sorry you're in this situation. That's one of the hardest things for me, because I hate it that people are in this situation now. I'm talking to people I can't even, what can I do, So thank you so much, Steve, for participating in this.
You're welcome, and I feel like that's heartfelt from you, and
5
I appreciate
minutes.
that. I really do.
Well, it is. I wouldn't be doing this for 20 years if it wasn't.
All right. Thank you very much, and I'll pass you over to Bruce.
Thank you so much.
How are you?
Hi, Bruce. Well, listen, we've heard these stories. Thank you for putting this little group together from Florida so that we could talk to them. But tell us now, from your point of view, what should be done? You're part of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, so you've got an agenda, and I'm sure your agenda is not to turn homeless people into Soylent Green. What would you like to do instead?
Well, speaking as someone who's formerly homeless myself, and by the way, had postgraduate degrees and even licenses as an addictions counselor and domestic violence counselor, so that proves to anyone that anyone can be homeless. regardless of their status. I think that the first thing that has to be done is that we need to begin to move away from this charity model to a solidarity model. And what I mean by that is we need to build movements from the bottom up that is informed and led by those impacted. You do an amazing job when you do this show every year.
Thank you.
Because you point out the reality that we who have been homeless are quite capable of coming up with solutions and answers. But in order for that to happen, the bureaucrats, we were at HUD yesterday, and our national coordinator, Sherry, a formerly homeless welfare mother, who's actually in the process of facing eviction herself.
And we'll be on the show later, by the way.
Yes, and she was arrested at the National HUD office. We were trying to get a meeting with Ben Carson. A bunch of us were there. It was caught on video and everything. And they refused to meet with us, except for a handler, and they wanted to meet with us outside. In other words, they were just going to fluff us off because the system is threatened by any movement that supports the idea of empowerment and self-actualization and self-determination.
Well, let's just have a fantasy here, Bruce, because we're running out of time. Let's just suppose we won. Let's suppose all of a sudden, Sherry ran for vice president on the Green Party ticket. Let's just suppose next year she runs as president and she wins. Okay, in the minute or two we've got left, what program would you like to see enacted if we finally had the strength to do it?
1 minute.
A jobs program for one that was living wage, a basic guaranteed income for everybody, regardless of their situation, that affords the basic necessities of life, universal health care, affordable, and I mean real affordable housing, and also turning a public works program into happening again like we used to, because we need a lot of work, infrastructure work in this country.
Okay, well, I'm glad to know that if I ask you what do you think we should do, you're not making shadow puppets on the radio. You've got a program, and there's plenty that we can do, and that's another thing that people don't understand. People
Get
act
out,
like
10 seconds.
Anyway, we're out. Bruce, thank you. Thanks to all of your people, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Homelessness Marathon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are listening to the Homelessness Marathon, originating from WPFW in Washington, D.C. The opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the participating organizations or the originating and affiliated radio stations.
You are listening to the Homelessness Marathon on the Pacifica Radio Network, coming from WPFW, Washington, D.C.
Welcome to the 20th anniversary edition of the Homelessness Marathon, a national dialogue on homelessness and poverty, presented in conjunction with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, the Poor People's March on Washington, and WPFW, your station for jazz and justice in Washington, D.C. The number to call in is 1-866
1 minute
left
and 20
out.
seconds.
That's 866-533-8688. Live video of the broadcast may be found at homelessnessmarathon.org.
Hi, my name is Galen Tyler. I'm from Philadelphia, and I've been on the march from June 2nd to arriving today and yesterday in Washington, D.C. I've been on this march, to kind of highlight, the issues that's been directly affecting poor people across this country, and to show that poor people can lead this movement, and they must be sitting at the table, and we're going to come up with solutions. It's a very, very big problem in this country around people not having the right to food, clothing, housing, health care, and education, and a job that pays a livable wage. And with that big problem, we're going to need a big solution. and that big solution is going to have to be very inclusive and have to include people that are being directly affected by these different issues. It can't come from the top up. It has to come from where people are working together to ensure that these issues are very addressed properly, and so that they're long sustaining, not just a quick fix, not just a Band-Aid, but a long sustaining solution, that allows us to have a future for our kids and our grandkids in this country.
That was a voice from the Poor People's March on Washington, currently in D.C. right as we speak. Welcome to the Homelessness Marathon on the Pacifica Radio Network, originating from Washington, D.C., where our host is WPFW, your Jazz and Justice station. Here with me in the studio, I have Penny Callan, who is a speaker advocate, and Megan Hustings, who is the interim director for the National Coalition for the Homeless. Penny and Megan, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, it's our honor and our pleasure. And on the line, we also have Paul Bowden, who is the field director for the Western Regional Advocacy Project. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, all right. Well, I'm glad to have all three of you here. Paul, let me start with you because I know you've got less time. Tell us, the Western Regional Advocacy Project is active in how many states?
In Colorado, California, and Oregon. So it'd be 3 states where we have active membership.
And what exactly are you fighting for?
The decriminalization of poverty and of homeless people and of poor people, and the restoration of a our colonization days has a long history of picking certain segments of our communities that local governments decide they want to get rid of. Sundown towns, Jim Crow, Japanese American Exclusion Act, Basurero Treaty, ugly laws. Today we're targeting homeless people. But homeless people weren't the first targets of these laws. Were standing still, sitting down, laying down, eating, being in town after dark. They call it now camping. These become criminal activities that get selectively enforced against segments of the community they want to leave and get the hell out of their towns. And they enforce these laws aggressively, and that's what we're opposing. That's what we're against. And we don't want to just end it for homeless people today. We want to end it once and for all.
Paul, let me ask Megan here a question. Thank you for that. Megan, is Paul just some kind of crackpot out there on the West Coast, or from your national perspective, have you seen these issues outside of the states that he mentioned?
Of course I'm a crackpot.
I was going to say that, Paul. No, this is happening everywhere. It's not just the West Coast. I think things recently have been more pronounced on the West Coast, and there's been a little bit more media coverage of goings-on, especially encampments and other things in California. But no, it's the same situation across the country. There's just not enough resources, affordable housing, shelter, you name it, for the number of people who are struggling to get by.
Penny, you're a formerly homeless woman,
Yes.
as I understand. Did you ever encounter any issues of criminalization? Were you on the street? Were you harassed? Have you ever intersected with this issue?
Not in that way, but when it came time to leave a shelter and I still didn't have a place to go, I only needed one more night, they still called the police to have me leave, and I refused to leave, so I was arrested for not leaving the shelter.
And you had a place to go if you had one more night there. So
Yes.
in other words, your alternative was the street for a night.
Yes.
And they were going to still call the police on you.
Yes.
Because they weren't really, it's not such a forgiving system is the point.
No.
Yeah, no.
Paul, if you had your druthers, now what are the things that you want to see enacted as opposed to the situation that we have now?
I want to see a government that feels that healthcare, education, housing, and since we're a capitalist system, a living income is a necessity, is a human right, is a good thing. Like, why would a government not feel that the healthcare needs, the education, a smart, educated, healthy, well-housed community membership is a good thing? We think it's a great thing for homeowners. We do $144 billion a year in housing subsidies for home ownership programs, but we feel like it's a charity and a drain and a hazard to possibly feel that poor people have a right to a place to live.
Well, what is it? What about when they say, "Oh, we just can't afford that. The government doesn't have enough money in its budget"? What's your answer to that?
That's BS. They're totally BSing us. I was just up in Eureka. That's where I'm coming down from, and I might be we may drop each other again, like I got dropped earlier because I'm in the middle of the redwoods getting back home. But last night at the Poor People's Campaign sleep out at the courthouse in Eureka, a woman that didn't know her way around with a couple of people in the car, like they claimed drove erratically, they got jacked up, guns pointed at them, handcuffed. One person got arrested for a bench warrant. And this was strictly about trying to make sure that the homeless and poor people that were sleeping out at the courthouse knew damn well that these 6 cop cars that came in over somebody trying to find a place to park was a sign, was a symbol. You guys ain't one of us. You need to get the hell out of Eureka, California.
Wow. And just to explain, the Poor People's Campaign that you're referring to is this thing that Reverend Barber, New Poor People's Campaign, is in Liz Theo Harris. She's also a reverend. That's a separate entity from the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, but they're being very active right now, and they're active, I take it, on the West Coast as well.
Yeah, they're pretty active around the country, and you know, it's separate in name and in structure, but the goals are the same. And you know, Sherry and those guys in Kensington Welfare Rights, they've been pushing under this banner for a long time, and it shouldn't be about the banner. Because when you look at what those guys have been pushing for out of Philly and their whole membership throughout the country, of which I'm proud to be a strong supporter of, this is what we need to be doing. We need to be building power, not asking. You know, Malcolm X says it really well. Power sees nothing without a demand, but you don't get a demand without building that power. That's what we've spent the last couple of days up here in Northern California. Rural communities get screwed over. The cops think nobody's watching. They don't get the media attention that the big cities get. And the brutality and the in-your-face, get the hell out of here, is brutal. And it's going to take organizing to fight back.
Well, let me turn to Megan here and ask Megan, in terms of, I've been doing this a while, Paul's been doing this even longer, and you've been in this field for a while. Is the climate changing for the better or for the worse, and how do you see that?
That's always a tough question.
Yeah, well, why do you think you're here?
Well, yeah, you know, I think there might be a few ways in which it's better. You know, we are getting a little bit more media coverage, a little bit more kind of public discussion about, you know, these issues that Paul's talking about, the just incredible dehumanization and criminalization of poor people. However, the government side of things, the solution side is just, it's kind of getting worse. You know, we still are fighting on the federal level. Every single budget cut, every single program that actually helps people survive is on the chopping block. And so we're just fighting to maintain the levels of funding that we have now when we need actually a lot more.
Yeah, we have to stress the levels of funding now are the levels that have kept people on the street. Right.
That's right. Yeah, and they've just remained, you know, pretty flat over the last few years, but we need more. And it doesn't, you know, in terms of the overall federal budget, it's not a huge. It's a drop in the bucket. It would make a massive difference in our communities.
Penny, let me ask you. Okay, how long ago was it that you became homeless?
I became homeless in 1990, and I was homeless for 10 years.
Now, I've had people on this show talking, and we will have somebody actually on from Finland later, but I've had people on from Denmark, Switzerland. Things are very different. And I know this sounds funny, but in those countries, if you've got a problem with keeping your housing, you go to an office and you get help. Okay. Have you found, in your general estimation, our government has been helpful to you in your struggle, or how helpful has it been?
Well, actually, my story's a lot different, you know.
Well, let's just hear your story then, because some people do get help. Let's hear it.
Well, like I said, I was homeless for 10 years, and it ended up being more of a blessing in disguise for me. Because ever since I was 6 years old, I've had a variety of different traumatic events. From my father dying, to being molested at 10 years old, to being raped at 13 and running away from home, and just in and out of domestic violence relationships and mental health. Stuff started, because post-traumatic stress disorder from the traumatic events. And that's basically how I became homeless when I was like 30 years old.
And the government did or did not help you with that?
They didn't. And I didn't know to even try to get help from the government at that time either. So,
but it wasn't like it was easy for you to access services, go to an office somewhere and say, I need help. That wasn't easy for you.
No. I had to ask other homeless people, for whatever help.
And what got you out of homelessness in the end?
Doing a lot of work on myself, mentally and emotionally, and also educational.
And then you got a job, or you got assistance?
Well, I had gotten not only a job where I worked at for 2 years at the Pentagon, but I also got my housing where I've been at for almost 18 years come August.
Oh my gosh, I better talk to you respectfully if you're associated with the Pentagon. Not that I would be disrespectful anyway.
Only 2 years I worked there.
Oh, that scares me.
Yeah.
Paul, do you want to tell us something a little bit about the cutbacks we're facing, the prospects of what's going to happen to what little programs that we have out there?
Yeah, but I also would say from the days I was in the street in the 80s and got started in this stuff, it's 10 times worse in terms of alternatives to sleeping outside. The shelter system has become an industry with homeless management information systems and coordinated intake and motivational case management, as if the problem of homelessness is dysfunctional human beings as opposed to a dysfunctional system. And that has become an industry. And the National Alliance to End Homelessness and these other groups are out there making buck.
Yeah, around here we refer to the National Alliance as Satanists, basically.
Well, but and then when you look at poverty systems, going back to the war on poverty, when we created 501c3 nonprofits and we created schools of social work, the problem of poverty is racism and classism. It's not dysfunctional people who end up poor. Or the problem of homelessness is a dysfunctional housing system. Nothing ends homelessness like a home.
What a funny concept.
I lost my mom at a young age and ended up out in the street. That's been happening to people forever.
Right.
But that didn't lead to millions of people sleeping out in the streets every night. So you got to separate out what's real issues that human beings go through, and how do we create a humane response to those issues, like domestic violence, where when we did the Violence Against Women Act, we ended up closing a bunch of domestic violence shelters and making them homeless programs. That's asinine.
Right.
There should always be, unfortunately, racism pre-exists the early 80s, classism pre-exists the early 80s. Homelessness is a manifestation of not addressing these systemic issues.
Let me tell everybody out there that the number to call in here on the Homelessness Marathon, the 20th Homelessness Marathon, is 866-LEFT-OUT, which is 866-533-8688. But, Paul, what in specific? I mean, here is the Trump administration has come in, and a lot of people are not familiar. Megan alluded to their proposing cutbacks, but a lot of people are not familiar with what that means. What does that mean in practice that they're talking about doing?
What it means is that the United States government is getting out of the business of housing as an issue that they control for people that are poor, and saying that all housing, with the low-income housing credit program, with RAD, where they're mortgaging off public housing units, that it's a commodity. And when you take the Reaganomics neoliberal BS from 1980 and you look at what's happened since then, Democrat or Republican administrations, it's that the Reagan mantra of government's incompetent, government's bad, let the private sector handle everything in our lives, our schools, our housing, our health care, that those are all commodities. and those should be controlled, and government should only give tax credits and tax breaks to corporations to run those systems because government is incompetent. Well, we need to start saying it's our freaking government, and government needs to do what we demand, not make profits for businesses. And Trump is a perfect manifestation of the 30 years, 35, 40 years of Reaganomics and neoliberal economics, and that's where we need to marshal all of our resources and include our artists and our lawyers and our organizers and listen to the voices and the priorities of poor and homeless people and start demanding that our government address those issues.
While we're talking about Trump, it's probably worth mentioning that he had a face-to-face sit-down with a leader of North Korea, but he hasn't had a face-to-face sit-down with a homeless person who's an American yet. So we have a caller on the line. That number is 866-LEFT-OUT or 866-533-8688. We have Mark from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Mark, to the Homelessness Marathon.
How are you guys doing this afternoon?
Well, we're having a good time.
Mm-hmm, I think so.
I hear you. Hey, so I had a real quick question. I'm hearing a whole lot of complaining and what the government hasn't done, but I'd like to bring up the name J.K. Rowling to everybody. She was homeless while writing the Harry Potter novel and then had them published as a homeless person. The only thing holding the homeless community back is the homeless themselves. Now, I will agree there are a couple of people out there that have major issues, and maybe shutting down the mental health programs back when Reagan was around was a bad idea. But it's not because the government hasn't done anything for them. It's not because of your skin color that you don't have certain things. It's because you're not willing to get up and do it for yourself.
All right, let me, Penny, let me toss that to you. You're shaking your head. You've been homeless. Is that because you were lazy and waited for the government to do things for you?
No, it's not. There's a lot of times that, social workers, they didn't even know, the other resources out there. There are so many people that I've talked to in the 10 years that I was homeless and also continue to talk to. And not only do they have severe mental health issues, so I kind of agree there, but there's just so many people that had given up on themselves. So it's not really the government, so yeah, I agree, but I also disagree.
There is, well, first of all, everybody agrees that to the extent that we're able to exercise it, we have personal responsibility. Yeah. And if we have some reason why we can't, we're disabled or whatever, that's different. But Mark, let me point out to you, are you still there, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wait, Mark, let me just point one thing out to you because, a lot of people believe what you believe, but it's a very narrow vision of what the government's role is. The government's role is not just with programs. It's the government that sets employment policies. It's the government that sets the minimum wage. It's the government that sets housing policies. So you have a city like San Francisco where full-time employed people can't remotely afford to live in that city. And it used to be different many years ago. Working people used to be able to live in that city. Yeah. That is a product of government policy which has nothing to do with homelessness or anti-poverty policy. It has to do with letting the real estate developers run amok.
No, so let's go back to Steve for a second. Steve went out on a job and worked for 6 weeks without a paycheck. I don't care how long I've been working for somebody. If you tell me that I got to go 6 weeks without a paycheck, I'm going to think something's up because I'm going to be like, well, that's not going to keep the electric bill on for my wife while I'm down there,
Mark, you're certainly right about that, but sometimes what if that's the only chance you have for a job and you just got to keep at it and hope that it works out?
Then I got to go look for something else. I got to work 2 or 3 jobs.
Okay, Mark. Thank you very much for the call. Certainly you speak for a lot of people. Megan, do you want to address any of these concerns?
Well, yes, I mean, I would say that it sounds, with all due respect, Mark, that perhaps you
He's off the line now, but go ahead and talk to him.
You haven't had to struggle yourself to survive. I mean, these, Jeremy mentioned the minimum wage. I mean, the value of the federal minimum wage has dropped significantly since it was set. People cannot. There are people who are working 40 hours a week and can't afford basic housing. In fact, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has just come out with their new Out of Reach report that looks at the cost of housing, and there's no county, there's no city in the country where you can work 40 hours a week at the federal minimum wage and actually be able to afford the average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment for your family. So it's not about people not working or not trying hard. It's about the systems, our economic system, the government systems, the whole economics of the country that are just not working for a large majority of people.
But, we all agree, right? I mean, that people have personal responsibility, but they have to exercise it within the context of the society they're in. For instance, if you're a soldier on a battlefield, you have personal responsibility, but the situation is there's people shooting bullets at you. That's not an everyday situation. Not everybody can cope with that. Not everybody will survive it. Same with homelessness. Paul, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, I mean, I'm not organizing with communities to create a nanny state and to create somebody to serve us and do for us. I'm looking for parity. If housing is a value to the United States government to the extent that they subsidize home ownership to the tune of $144 billion a year with no screening criteria, anybody who qualifies, doesn't matter your past record, whether you've had a felony, doesn't matter what country you were born in. If you're paying a mortgage, the government subsidizes your housing because of the fact that money primarily goes to mortgage companies. But they clearly see that housing is a value, and they subsidize the hell out of it. When that housing is for poor people, they screen the hell out of it. We have waiting lists. They're tearing it down, and there's less and less of it available for people that need it.
Paul, explain that to people. Just explain that one point, because people don't get it necessarily. When you're saying you're subsidizing homeowners, you're talking about the tax deduction for mortgage payments and things?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I'm talking about all tax deductions that homeowners get. And it's administered by the IRS. There's no intake process. There's no screening process. There's no waiting list. There's nobody coming and counting toothbrushes in your bathroom to see who's living there. There's no rules around who can crash at your house or not.
No drug
There's
testing.
none of that. And it's $144 billion a year that we spend subsidizing that type of housing. And that's because of who benefits from those subsidies. But for poor people, we say we can't afford it. They need to get off their asses, and they need to go work. Well, you know what? Most poor people are working, and nobody's looking for the nanny state. We're looking for parity, we're looking for equality, and we're looking to be treated as human beings by our government. Why wouldn't a government want to see the people being governed healthy, educated, and well-housed? Why is that considered communist or socialist or lazy? We give tax breaks to rich people that's never worked a day in their lives. We don't mind doing that, but we won't give a benefit or a helping hand to people who are working their butts off and can't afford a place to live.
Well, you make a point.
That's not about help me. It's about treat me equally the same way you treat everyone else, especially those that are rich.
Well,
and we're pretty freaking safe from invasion in Canada. So maybe we can look at our military budget and say, is this really helping us? Is this really protecting us? And do we need to spend 10, 20 times on our military-industrial complex because it benefits major corporations as we spend on providing care for senior citizens that need a place to live?
Well, Paul, I'm ready to start the Count the Toothbrushes of the Rich movement here. I thought you had a good point there. I know you have limited time. Are you still able to stay with us, or do I have to sign off with you now, Paul?
I can stay as long as the cell connection works.
Okay. All right. Very good.
I pulled over on the side of the road, so I'm okay as long as I don't get hit.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad. Yes, we hope you don't get hit, Paul, right on the air. Bad idea.
Good makes a good rating.
Only if I can advertise it in advance, Paul. We'll say, come listen, and then we'll hear a man getting hit. Never mind. We're not going to do that. The number here to call in, which I will advertise, is 866-LEFT-OUT. That's 866-533-8688. Megan, what do you have to say about this issue of government responsibility versus personal responsibility? This is certainly Mark, who brought this up, he's not the first to bring this up. I mean, this is a real issue. You hear it every day. So what would be the National Coalition for the Homeless's point of view on that, or yours?
Well, no, honestly, I think that this is at the heart of the issue. Why we have homelessness today is because, like Paul said, as a country right now, we don't really believe that housing, that a livable income, that healthcare, that these things are actually human rights. Most of the world thinks that these are human rights. We're one of the very few, pretty much the only developed nation that has not signed on to some pretty standard
healthcare, for instance, right?
Yeah. These internationally held values of basic human rights, basic human necessities. So, a lot of the work that we do is spent doing public education, is trying to educate people about, well, this is what homelessness is actually like, and this is why people fall into it, and this is how awfully they're treated while they are homeless.
It's worth pointing out that just a few decades ago, you could get a free higher education in the United States, and a lot of wonderful people were able to do that. And I don't remember we had Karl Marx on the dollar bill back then. This was still a capitalist country. So people should understand that even within the terms of how our country is structured, the system that we operate on, things have gotten much worse than they were just a few decades ago. Yeah. That number to call in again is 866-LEFT-OUT, which is 866-533-8688. And on the line we have Burke from Overland Park, Kansas. Burke, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for calling. What's on your mind, Burke?
I was wondering what guests and host thoughts were on, it's kind of been touched on a little bit, but just like broadly, government funding for homelessness, for drugs and mental health issues, housing, all these things. Over the last 30 to 35 years, as your guests have pointed out, how they've crumbled. It's beginning to seem, and then with Trump to boot and the very far right controlling all branches of government, it seems a lot to me like passive eugenics and almost a Third Reichish mentality of let people suffer, let them die, so the rich can get richer, and so the population dwindles. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but it very much scares me. And it should scare everyone else too.
Burke, let me turn that over. Megan, what do you have to say to that?
Well, so yesterday I was participating in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, so different from the Poor People.
Right, we're trying to keep them straight. Campaign. Same cause.
But one thing that stood out was that while there was a larger group of people doing civil disobedience, there was a smaller group of faith leaders who went up to the Supreme Court steps and stood in a circle. There were 9 of them, and they started praying. After maybe half an hour of praying, they were asked to leave. They weren't moving. They were arrested. Actually, they're still in jail as far as I know. And immediately after they were taken away, there were tourists up and down the stairs of the Supreme Court. No problems, loitering, taking pictures, taking whatever time they could. So, I try to keep. I would prefer not to go to that place of. More conspiracy theory, thinking that it is some kind of passive eugenics, but it's hard not to. And when you think about just the overall numbers of people who are currently homeless, who are on the steps of being homeless, it's the growing inequality between the rich and everybody else. Basically, it's hard to see that that there is going to be parity unless we all stand up and we make our voices heard. And there is some of that going on. I think that we have to all take responsibility for ourselves, and that we have to ensure that this is a participatory democracy, and that we all vote, and that we all hold our elected officials accountable to provide for the basic human necessities that we all need.
Burke, I want to thank you very much for the call. You have a last comment you want to make?
Yeah, I just wondered if maybe people thought that part of the problem in getting some of these solutions taken care of, going back to the 501c3 stuff, corporations, et cetera, it's like the majority is suffering from this delusion, like I call it like the Batman delusion. Some rich, generous, big-hearted Koch brother or Bill Gates is going to come and solve all the world's ills with their private money that they inherited by their own hard work and choice, which is total BS to begin with. But just the narrative that is driven home so much is that somebody other than the government will always take care of this for you. It's going to be a corporation. It's going to be a private individual, but the government's bad government.
Burke, thank you so much for the call. I want to note, by the way, I mean, personally, I'm on the same wavelength there because I noticed what's-her-name Kardashian got somebody pardoned and recently. Well, it's getting to be like you have to go talk to the nobility, like we're in a feudal society. Maybe Prince so-and-so will help you out. We got to keep moving here. Eric from Alexandria, Virginia, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
How you doing?
Good. Well, what's on your mind, Eric?
Hey, my thing, I heard this gentleman telling people to get off their butt and work. And it's a mind blower because I'm just listening to C-SPAN yesterday. We spent $9 billion with a B in Afghanistan to rebuild it. $9 billion. Now that's the craziest ever to me. If you ask me, how come we can't spend that here and help our own? Because a smart nation is a good nation. And healthy nation is a great nation. And that's all I got to say, buddy.
Thank you so much, Eric. On the line, everybody hang on. We got our second guest for this hour, who is Amanda Brown Hunter, and I'm sure she's going to have a lot to say from Amarillo, Texas. Amanda, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Amanda, you are currently in a tent city in Amarillo. Is that correct?
I don't live there. I started one.
Okay, so tell us the story about the tent. You used to live in it, right?
No, I've actually never been homeless.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood that, but you founded this tent city. Tell us the story about it.
I had started feeding for a group here called Amarillo Brown Bag Runs, and we would go and feed the homeless every day. And there was one particular group that we called the Ice House Camp, and it was probably about 30 individuals who were living in tents, campers, whatever they could manage. And the city had decided to start enforcing a no camping ordinance and sent the police in to, evict them and bring in the boom trucks and destroy all of their things.
Now, were these people were they doing anything wrong?
No. I mean, they were just trying to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I had begun talking to them and developing relationships with them, and so I began asking them, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the shelters? And that's whenever they started telling me all the different reasons why they don't utilize the shelters, and quite frankly, all of them were very valid reasons, such as being separated from your spouse. I wouldn't want to be separated from my spouse or children, and, just the reasons are endless. And so we started talking and decided, well, what if we could find private land? So I went out and found private land and rented it for us to stay on, and that's how Christ Church Camp and New Beginnings was born.
Mm. And so you made a deal with a landowner, as I understand it, who allowed and it was okay with him to have homeless people on his land.
Yes.
So it wasn't like you were sneaking on somebody's land and doing some horrible thing. It was everybody was copacetic with it.
Yes. I was upfront with everything from the beginning, and he agreed to it, and so we set up camp and started a nonprofit.
And Amarillo, the city of Amarillo then said to you, hey, that's wonderful. You're helping us take care of this problem. You've got homeless people there. We're off the streets. We congratulate you and we support you. Is that what happened?
No, not at all. The city at first didn't actively work against me, but they were definitely not working with me either. They said everything's fine as long as I stay up to code. So they would come out. We started November 4th, and by the end of November, they had come out and started, telling me, okay, you're going to have to get porta potties. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do this. Everything they told me that, we had to do. We got to it absolutely as quickly as we could, usually within 24 hours. And then the harassment continued even after I got up to code, to where we had people who would leave their excess bicycle parts out around their tents. Well, they said that wasn't okay, that it was a harborage for rats. So they would put them inside these little tents to where they would have them organized. They weren't out in the open, and that still wasn't good enough for the city. During the holidays, where everybody is exceptionally generous, we had tons of different groups coming in, bringing donations and food, and getting to know our residents, really changing their perception on what they thought homelessness was and who the homeless were. But during that time, of course, we didn't have any extra dumpsters. We had 2 dumpsters on the street that we would try to throw the leftover trash and things like that in. And they were always overflowing. Well, the city started citing us for that. So we asked the city if we could get larger dumpsters, or if we could even get the dumpsters that were there emptied more often. And we were told things such as they can't allocate tax dollars to such a venture, and, to where I had to provide dumpsters too. They weren't going to make it easy on me whatsoever. And
we should just point out quickly that actually from a city's point of view, it's cheaper to provide dumpsters than to provide homeless services. So,
well, perhaps.
You would generally think so.
Yeah.
Well,
Megan, you want to say what?
The cities like LA are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on cleaning up encampments right now instead of housing people. So
but it's cheaper to give a dumpster to an encampment than, if it's a good one, right, than it is to put people in housing. I mean, we're not talking about the gold-plated solution here. All they were asking for was a dumpster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, see, our city had set up a couple of years ago a board to try to be proactive in how we deal with the homeless. And but they also stated that, it would cost upwards of $1 million plus in order to do this low barrier shelter. Well, I did it on my own, and I didn't cost the city a dime.
Right. Paul, let me ask you, have you heard this story, anything like it before, where people are voluntarily taking responsibility as citizens, and they've put together a tent encampment, and everybody's doing okay, and they're being responsible, and they're not trying to be a burden to the government, and yet it's, Paul is gone. We've lost Paul. I'm talking to Paul, and he's not there. I'm sorry to hear that. He warned us we might drop him. Okay, well, getting out of the shelters, and you've actually been in one, right?
Yes, I've been in several shelters.
And were they wonderful places to be?
For me, they were. There's maybe a few horror stories, that I've kind of witnessed, and other people, they talk about the horror stories, but I didn't see the bed bugs. I may have seen the rats or the mice or something. But like I said before, it was more of a blessing in disguise for me.
For you personally.
Yeah.
But let me just ask you this. From your point of view and from what you've seen, can you understand why people would say, I'd rather be in a tent city with people in a similar situation, on a landowner who welcomes us there, that would be preferable to being in a shelter? There'd be a reason for that.
Oh, definitely, yes. Because they do separate families.
They throw you out and stuff in the morning. You can't just lie around. I don't mean like lazily. I mean you can't, even if you're sick, you can't stay in the
Well,
shelter.
there's one shelter that's 24 hours, but now you still have to get out during the day.
So you're out by 7 or 6 or 7, and then you can't get back in, and not the way people normally live. So Amanda, what happened to this thing? The city was there. They were talking about bicycle parts. They were talking about this. They were talking about that. And what was the upshot?
Well, we came up to code with everything they had asked for. And so whenever they couldn't get rid of us by making us come up to that code aspect, they suddenly found this ordinance that goes back to the 1980s that says there is no, you can't erect a shelter for more than 72 hours at a time. So that was on February 14th. That was basically their card to get rid of us, because if we did not leave within a certain amount of time, we would start receiving the fines of up to $2,000 a day per person per violation.
So they forced you out, basically.
Yes. They disbanded us. We found another lady to rent us property, and we were going to take down the tents every 3 days and then stick them back up, an inconvenience but doable. Well, the city told us that wouldn't work. And so I went and found other land to rent, and we had been hiding there for a couple of months before the city found us. And after the city found us, they didn't have our permission to come on land. We had no trespassing, everything like that. So they used a game warden to illegally gain access to the land so that they could say that they saw this violation or this violation. And so then they started sending this property owner notices that we had to be gone.
Megan, you wanted to say?
Well, there's just so much of this. It seems really backwards that a lot of cities are spending almost more time trying to figure out how to interrupt people's daily survival acts than to figure out how to house them.
Megan, one of the things that I was hoping you would do here while we're talking to you is, can you give us a thumbnail, a brief portrait of who homeless people are statistically across the board? Are they all drug addicts? Are there no exceptions? I see you, Penny, are shaking your head. And I mean, I'm being facetious, but
yeah,
right.
Yeah, this is one of the questions that we answer all the time. I mean, Penny,
well, who's homeless in America?
Anybody can be homeless.
Yeah. But I mean, do we have any? What percentage are children? What percentage are employed? Do we know that?
Well, I hate to talk about numbers because numbers are a huge problem. Period. But
and they're all inaccurate. But what should we think?
Maybe around a quarter of people who experience homelessness do so because of mental illness or because of substance abuse issues. What we see a lot of times is that actually those mental health issues and substance abuse problems come up after someone becomes
I've seen
homeless.
that with my own eyes.
Homelessness itself is a traumatic experience.
Correct. Yeah.
So about 40% of the homeless population are families who have children, many of whom are headed by single mothers or just headed by the mother. There are maybe about a quarter of the homeless population, or what's known as chronically homeless, have been on the streets for a very long time. And suffer some of those, harder disabilities to get over, harder things that keep them on the streets. And then most of the population, the rest is known as episodically homeless, people who go in and out, work jobs, they get evicted because they miss a payment or two on the rent, and they're back on the streets, and then they finally find a landlord who's willing to rent to them. It's usually probably a pretty bad landlord. And they might go in and out of places or staying with friends and family. I talk about numbers. We talk about people who are staying with friends and family, the Department of Education counts the number of students who are homeless in our public education system, and they've counted about 2 million was the last count. Children only.
We should explain to people that the Department of Education uses different criteria for who is homeless. It almost doesn't overlap at all with the HUD criteria. So these people who are doubled up and it has a big impact on education, have to move a lot from relative to relative or wherever. It's a bad thing, but they're not even considered homeless by HUD.
That's correct. Someone who is staying with friends and family, staying with a motel, not interacting with homeless services perhaps. Staying in their car, just a place where they're not found easily, or they're not, pointed out as homeless during the point in time counts, are not counted. So, we have a point in time count from HUD that's saying this is how many homeless people there are. We have 500,000 homeless people, and that's not the case. If you look at the HUD numbers only, they'll also tell you the number of shelter beds that are available, and there are actually 500,000, a little bit over, formerly homeless people who are staying in permanent supportive housing. These folks aren't even counted in, even though their housing is being covered by
they're not on their own really
programs.
yet. Right.
Yeah, I mean they're staying in in apartments mostly, and that are voucher based. A lot but they're all funded by homeless services. Those vouchers are funded by the HUD homeless programs, but they are not counted as
in
homeless.
that. Okay.
So yeah, even if we look at HUD numbers, that's at least 1 million people who are homeless or recently formerly homeless.
Thank you for that. Amanda, can you give us a brief profile of, you had 20, 30 people in that community, still do, I guess?
Right now, I've got about 15.
Okay.
We had upwards of 50 at a time, and right now I've got about 30 wanting to come to camp. But until we know what we're going to face with the city, I'm not expanding yet. The city has gone ahead and given papers to the landowner stating that they filed in court, so that's going to be our next step.
And can you tell us just briefly, I mean, who these people are? Are they all men? Are they all women? Are they women and children? Are they? What are these people? Who are these people?
I don't allow anyone under 18 in my camp, although I have had several single mothers at different times come up looking for a place for her and her children. I wasn't able to accept them. We have women, we have men, we have veterans, we have elderly, we have drug addicts, we have people who are just trying to get enough rent to make, or enough money to make their deposit for rent. You know, I've had people stay as little as 3 days. I've had people, you know, stay from the beginning.
Okay, that number to call in again, thank you for that, is 866-LEFT-OUT, which is 866-533-8688. And we do want to take another call here. We have Barbara from D.C. Barbara, welcome to the Homelessness Marathon.
Yes, I would like to find out, do they have to have a home in order to vote?
No. The law says no, you don't. But nobody really makes it easy either. It's hard to vote when you're homeless because you have to show where your district is or where you are, and then they'll ask you questions, and there are obstacles in front of it. But constitutionally, you still have a vote.
It depends on your community, but yeah.
Well, tell us, Megan.
A lot of homeless don't have IDs in order to get voter registration.
Right.
One thing that we're starting in our community is we've got several different groups gathering together now so that we can start getting more people registered to vote.
Well, good for you. Good for you. You're in D.C., so you're working on a voter registration drive among the homeless?
I was concerned about where they go to get IDs so they can prove that they are citizens of the United States.
Right. Okay, so that's you, Barbara. Amanda, you're working on the voter ID issue.
Right.
Okay. Let me tell you both the story really quick, which is that when we did this broadcast from Mississippi after Katrina, people had lost everything. They had no IDs, and there were a lot of them, and it was a desperate situation. And if I had been running the government, one of the first things I would have done would have been to set up little government kiosks with computers and everything to help restore people's IDs. And this was something the government did not do. To get aid, you had to have 4 forms of ID, like a bill from a store you had shopped at to show where your residence had been, but the store was washed away and you couldn't get them. So this business about IDs is something that they have left a lot of people to suffer without IDs. And it's a very serious problem, and it's just one of the gazillion problems that are not right now being addressed. Barbara, do you have a last comment or something you'd like to make?
I just wanted to know if there's what you call where you pay your taxes, internal revenue. Don't they have a list of names and IDs for people?
It's hard to get. If you've lost your actual Social Security card, if you don't have access to your actual birth certificate, even though those have been filed with the government, it's next to impossible to get those things replaced. You have to go through so much documentation. It costs hundreds of dollars. You have to go back and forth to these offices.
And if you don't have an address to get mail at, that makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. Or transportation.
Barbara, thank you very much for the call. You asked some good questions. Penny, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because I've asked this, and I want to ask this pretty much a lot of people, you know. In the shelter you were in, what percentage of the people in that shelter that you were in would you say were good people, and what percentage would you say bad people? Your definition, people I should be afraid of if I ran into them, and what percentage were good, hardworking, or decent people would give you something?
Well, I'm not sure how many people were working, because...
Well, never mind the word. How many people should I be afraid of? Terrible, there are terrible people, and I wouldn't want my kids to hang out with them, and how many of them are good people?
Maybe about a third.
Are sketchy, you're saying?
Yeah.
But 2/3 you think are decent people?
Yeah, this is all back in the 90s. Now maybe it might be a little higher,
Because a lot more kind of innocent people are losing their housing now, right?
Yeah.
But basically you're here to say they're not all bad people, right?
Oh, no.
And Amanda, let me ask the same thing of you. What do you feel that you have any people there are bad people, or is it a mix? What have you encountered dealing with homeless people?
I can't say that I've got one that I would consider bad.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I would say less than a quarter of the people that I encounter regularly would I consider bad, or someone that, you wouldn't want to walk in a dark alley with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Now, you, in your situation, though, you've helped these people get housing. I mean, a tent housing, but a community of some sort. Mm-hmm. Has it been your experience that every day there's a knife fight? Every day there's some...
Oh gosh, no. Oh gosh, no. Even what we call the drunk alley, for lack of a better term, but it's where a lot of the fights happen. It's where a lot of people spend the day drinking and stuff like that. They don't even have fights like that every day.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, you're always going to have your people who instigate things, whether it be fueled by alcohol, depression, rage, drugs, whatever. But really those are very few and far between. And for, the advocate or the volunteer who's just trying to help them, they don't want to take advantage of that. They're people with feelings the same as you and I. And generally, when people are good to us, we'll be good back.
Would you say you've seen a community? I mean, do these people in your tent city, which you've set up, and you're not a PhD in tent cities. You're somebody who's hands-on. You've learned from experience there. Do you see them as being mutually supportive of each other? Is there a community developing, or are they still isolated from each other? How has that gone?
It's developed into a community. Whenever I first came across the Ice House camp,
5 minutes.
It was a scary place to go. I certainly wouldn't have gone there at night.
Mm-hmm.
And people really, it was more of an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, mind your own business. But since they have come to Christchurch camp, they have developed into this brotherhood, this community bond of helping each other and helping me to make sure camp is running well. They care about the impression that we give to the public, because they understand that a few bad seeds has caused so many of them to look bad. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change, is that perception, because they're all just like you and I, all of them.
Penny, I see you
shaking.
shake.
Ones with bad attitude.
Which may change. If you've been on the streets, it's easy to have a bad attitude when you've been getting kicked like a dog. Penny,
exactly.
I see you nodding your head in agreement. Tell us what you're thinking.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely experienced a lot of good and a lot of positive people. We are like family, when the shelters that I've been in, I remember coming home one night. It was like my first month or two back in 1990, and I hear the girls saying, "Hey, there she is, where you been?" And I told them, and they told me that somebody ran up in the shelter, "Hey, that white lady with the blonde hair got jumped outside." They thought it was me, and they came out there to take up for me. And when I got an understanding that they were there like that for me, I just started crying. And they asked me why I'm crying, and I told them, I said, nobody's really been there like that for me.
And you've experienced that from homeless people.
Oh, yeah.
What you didn't get from housed people.
Yeah. I've experienced more respect more love, more acceptance from people that were homeless than I had and even in family.
You're not the first person who's told me this, and Amanda, you're agreeing with that, right?
Absolutely.
You know, I remember getting a birthday cake from the women in my cube when I stayed at CC&B many years ago. You know, it was just, you know, a wonderful feeling, you know, having that kind of love, you know.
Now, I have to point out, Amanda, that the kind of situation you've got there with some tents on some land, this is the primal situation of humanity. Before we had high-rises and things like that, right? We had teepees on the plain. We had long houses. We had Mongolian yurts. We had things where, but that's what human beings do, is they form communities, and sometimes out of very limited structures, but that's what our species does. And in Amarillo, they're making that kind of illegal. That kind of just strikes me as odd.
They are absolutely making it illegal. There is no sleeping on public property between noon and 5, or between midnight and 5 or 6 a.m. You know, now they're saying you can't camp on private property for longer than 72 hours. And in Amarillo, that includes RVs and fifth wheels. So if you've got your in-laws staying out in front of your house in their fifth wheel for longer than 72 hours, they can give you up to a $2,000 a day fine per person per violation.
Which, if you're homeless, of course, you take out of your back pocket, right? That kind of money, right? Well,
right.
Listen, right. Amanda, let me thank you very much for participating in the Homelessness Marathon. We're running out of time, but let me also just express my hope that you'll be able to keep your tent city together, and my admiration for you as a housed person who has pitched in and helped out. So I want to thank you very much.
And I'd like to thank you for doing what you're doing, too.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you both.
Thank you. Megan, tell us, we only got a minute or two left. Why don't you tell us exactly what does the National Coalition for the Homeless want to see happen?
Well, we want to see the government step up. We can afford as a country to provide housing for everyone in this country. We can afford the basic necessities that we all need as humans. And so that's what I really like to see. You know, the root cause of all homelessness is a lack of affordable housing. So, you know,
30
it's
seconds.
a fairly simple thing to do.
All right. Well, we're out of time. Megan Hustings, Interim Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless.
Thank you.
And Penny Callan, Speaker Advocate. Thank you both for participating in the Homelessness Marathon. We'll be back in just a few seconds.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
You are listening to the Homelessness Marathon, originating from WPFW in Washington, D.C. The opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the participating organizations or the originating and affiliated radio stations.
Sad what the government